right, so today we're in part 8, Are You Covenanted? And we're going to pick up where we left off. Wow, that was a long time ago. What was it, 2 days ago? We're going to pick up where we left off in Deuteronomy chapter 4. Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 4. And we're going to pick up where we left off in verse 9. I'm going to do a little verse 9 reset here, just real quickly. So in Deuteronomy chapter 4 and verse 9, it says, only guard yourself. This is after he already talked about, and what nation is there that has such great laws? And what nation is there that heard directly from Elohim? And what nation is there? So he's saying, look, we are unique. No, there's no other nation that's had this experience. He says, but don't get all full of yourself and excited about it and think that's good enough just there. He says, you have to guard yourself and guard your life diligently, lest you forget the words your eyes have seen, unless they turn aside from your heart all the days of your life. Now, first of all, he says we got to be careful. It's not just remembering the signs and the wonders and knowing Yahweh is close to you, but you now need to guard after. The whole point of him being close to you was to share the words so that you can start to do the words and that you can start to become blessed, safe, and changed. And that's really the key. But I think it's really interesting. I was going so quickly at the end on part 7 that we really didn't catch the part of this where he says that you're going to not forget the words your eyes have seen. Did Moses take the tablets and pass them around? See, the Jewish community believes, it's kind of that sort of urban legend thing, but we don't know what really happened. They really believe that it was a full sensory experience at Mount Sinai. They heard, they saw, they felt, they smelled it, they tasted it. I mean, they believe that's why the people turned to Moses. We can't do this anymore lest we die. It's too fully overwhelming. I mean, could you imagine if you not only heard my voice, but you could taste it and smell it and see it and feel it all at the same time? That would be just like short circuit overload on the senses. And so he says here, guard yourself and guard your life, lest you forget the words your eyes have seen, unless they turn aside from your heart all the days of your life. Now also, I think maybe the words you've seen has to do with you've seen the blessing, you've seen the fruit, you've seen the result of those words. Can that maybe be a possibility there? What do you think of that? I mean, maybe when you think of those words and you don't think about what it looks like. Maybe I ought to use that more. I'm asking you to think about what it looks like. You guys have heard me say that 1,000 times, right? We look at things and we're reading these words and say, well, what does that look like in your life? We talk about the 2 great commands, loving Yahweh and loving your neighbor. Okay, what does that look like? So he's telling you need to guard after the words that your eyes have seen. You know what it's supposed to look like. And you've seen the results of it. Because if you don't guard, you will forget. It means that it will not be in your heart anymore. And this is all about the heart. What does Deuteronomy 8:2 say? He wants to see whether it's in your heart to guard his commands, to keep his commands. That is, in my opinion, the test that all of us has to go through and pass. The Deuteronomy 8:2 test. I know it doesn't say that specifically there. But it does, in my opinion, describe something that everybody has to go through. We are here to show him and demonstrate to him that it's in our heart to keep the covenant. What's the covenant? You shall obey diligently. Everything comes out of my mouth, and I will accept you as my people and take care of everything else. And so that's why Deuteronomy 8:2 fits right into that. He led them through the wilderness for 40 years to humble them, big piece of the puzzle, and to test and prove and see whether it was in their heart to keep the commandments. Well, that's what he's talking about here in chapter 4. Okay, so we haven't gotten to chapter 8 yet, but we've gotten to chapter 4, and he goes, look, you saw the words, and you need to guard after it, but you got to make sure that if you forget, guess what's going to happen? It will maybe be turned aside from your heart, and then basically what's going to happen then? Disaster. So not only worry about you, he says, and you shall make them known to your children and your grandchildren. Okay, that was the question that came up later in the Q&A that I said I'd cover today. We are unfortunately dealing with generational splits in terms of belief, observance, covenant. We're not a cohesive nation. We're like the family or tribe of Jacob or of Judah or Abraham when he was a cohesive group with family members and children and grandchildren all traveling and living together. The tribal sort of way of living. We're not in that anymore. We get to a certain age and we just go off and do whatever we want. That's what we do. We get to that age, we don't care anymore what our parents say, and we go off and do whatever we want. You guys all did that, and your children are now doing it to you. Welcome to their world. Your parents know exactly what that feels like. And some of you call your parents up and go, I don't understand, and they start laughing at you. Yeah, I've been praying you'd get to experience that. It's kind of like the mother's curse. Everybody know the mother's curse? I hope you have one just like you. You're all laughing. Anybody heard that curse? It works, doesn't it? See, but I'm not that smart. And I was a red, yellow, sarcastic, wise guy. So when my mother said that to me, I turned to her, looked her in the eye, and said, I hope I have two. And when my children turned 2, I called her and said, can you please take this away? No, actually, I said, I'm sorry. She goes, what are you sorry for? I said, that whole mother's curse thing. How do you reverse that? This isn't a joke. I did this. Ask my wife. Ask my mother. And all she did was laugh. She goes, it works. Okay. It does work. But actually, even if mom never did it to you, it still works. You are going to have ones just like you. Okay? But that's not a joke. I really did that. I called her up and said, Mom, I'm sorry for whatever I did when I was 2. Oh, well, that's interesting. Why is that? You want to guess, Mom? All right. Anyway, not that my kids were awful. I just started to recognize what I must have been like and dealing with all those hard things, because I remember those days when she looked at me and said, ooh, I hope you have one just like you. One of those wonderful moments, those proud moments, when mom's going, I don't know who that is, Yes. Okay, but that's that thing here. It says, and you shall make them known to your children and grandchildren. But we don't have that society, that structure today. So I want you to be released from the pressure that if your children are already adults and they have children, and you raised your children a certain way and they are not easily departing it, that you are not obligated and responsible now to fix that problem. It's now his problem. Please don't feel you need to get in there, meddle with somebody else's family, because your children are no longer, under your authority. They have their own autonomy and authority. But this was supposed to be that you would do it and teach your children, and then they would continue doing it and teach their children, and you would be counsel and advisor as the elder to them. But if you do not actually have this relationship, you are not obligated to try to insert yourself into a place that you absolutely are not welcome. Now, if you are welcome, do it. But a lot of you know what I'm talking about. You have children that would not be happy if you tried to get in there and try to teach their children, or even if you want to try and teach them. They're already praying for you because they think you're lost. Right? Some of that out there? Your children, because some of you grew up in the South where everybody and everybody's cousin is a former pastor, whatever it is. Because I can't tell you how many people come and say, Rabbi, you don't understand. My brother's a pastor, my sister's a pastor, my father's a pastor, his father was a pastor, his mother was a pastor, everybody was a pastor. I didn't know there was that many, how many churches were there? Well, then you walk around the South, there's a church on every corner. There was a need for a lot of pastors. And so, sure, they were raised a certain way, and now you're the one who's changed. And you're going to think, I just read this verse. I'm supposed to go do this. Think of the context of it, though. Who is Moses? Well, first of all, who's talking here? Okay, it's Moses. Well, Yahweh is talking to Moses. Moses is talking, and he's telling them this here. This is a big sermon before going into the land. Who's he talking to? Corporate Israel. Israel as a nation. This isn't for every generation in the future and all of their children and grandchildren who may be doing anything. Is that fair? Okay? So please be released of that pressure and that guilt and that frustration that you can't, because nothing you can do except be the example, be the light. You walk it out the best you can and let them see the blessing you have. And then they might come to you and say, Grandma, Grandpa, Mom, Dad, whatever level it is, right? Children, grandchildren. What are you doing that's different? How come you seem to be doing good when the rest of us are going crazy? That's all you can do at this point. So you have to be at peace. You know, the greatest thing that Yahweh wants you to have is shalom. Shalom in the home, shalom in your life, shalom in all aspects of your life, that peace. And a lot of you, when you read Torah, it actually makes it worse and disturbs all your peace because you're thinking, oh no, I really screwed this up and now I got to go fix it. Well, that would only be true about the things you have control over, the things that you actually can change or fix. So please be encouraged that there are things you can do that with, and you better and should be doing it because he's expecting you to. He's expecting you absolutely to work on and do what you need to do about everything you have control over, authority over, and can do. And he will help you with all the things you can't do. And so you just have to accept that reality. So hopefully that makes sense and I took care of that. Because I know that for a lot of people, that's part of the counseling calls that I get when people call me up. See, all those people have to think I'm doing Illuminati things here. Do all kinds of hand signals. They go crazy on YouTube when I do that. I'm trying to bring my hand up like a phone, okay? But when you get counsel calls, this is something that I know a lot of you, especially you get older, so you have children and grandchildren, etc., you wonder, well, what can I do? Because when the grandchildren come over, you think, oh, great, I'm going to go ahead and just make sure you're not usurping. You know, you can't usurp the authority of your children over their children. I have been in my parents' house and my in-laws' house, and both of them made the same mistake. I was standing right there. One of my children, when they were little, did something, and they went over to discipline them right when I was standing right there. And I said, excuse me, I'm right here. I get to decide what happens here. Don't need your help. That's usurping. And so we have to be careful with that. Once your children became parents, they're the authority in that child's life. And I don't care how much it breaks your heart and frustrates you, there's only so much you can do to give counsel to the parent. Now, when those children become adults, they may want to come and talk to you. Well, that's maybe a little different because now they're independent. But until they become that age of independence, in this country it's usually around 18, you need to respect that they're under a covering, especially if they're in their parents' house. It's a challenging thing. It's a challenging thing. Okay, let's go ahead and continue here. In verse 10, the day when you stood before Yahweh, your Elohim, at Horeb, Yahweh said to me, assemble the people to me, and I make them hear my words, so that they learn to fear me all the days they live on the earth, and teach them to their children. So the main thing that we're teaching the children is what? To fear him. What's the root cause? Really seriously, the very simplistic root cause of all your issues, Torah-wise and vertically, is not having a proper fear of Yahweh. I mean, at the root of everything that you possibly do wrong, it's not just because you prefer this and like that and have lust for this or lust for that or addicted to this it's because you don't have a strong enough, appropriate fear of Yahweh. When I do that teaching, and I've done it in a lot of places as I go when I'm a guest speaker, because that is the beginning of it all. The fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge, the beginning of understanding, it's the beginning. And that's why he says it here. He says, look, assemble the people, make them hear my words, so they learn to fear me. So what do the words have to do with fearing him? Because in the words he tells you, this is where we get that awe and reverence. We're awestruck by the awesome majesty of the stuff he offers us. And we should be afraid of the stuff he says will happen if we don't do what we're supposed to do. So that's the power of the words. When you hear about living forever, that's awesome. No more tears, no more stress, no more pain, no more suffering. That's incredible stuff. So that's where we get the awe and the reverence. But he also says that I have the ability to cause your life to be a living nightmare. And I can curse you, and even if I have to, snuff you out completely. If you continue to just be rebellious upon rebellious. That should make you afraid. Not afraid like in a wrong way, but just like realizing he's not kidding. And he can do what he says he can do. And it's funny because we like to believe the good part. Oh yeah, he can do that. He can give me eternal life and he can do all these wonderful things for me. Oh, but I'm not all that sure about the torture, killing, whatever stuff. He's got all of that power. That's where that fear of Yahweh comes in. So he says, assemble the people to me so I can make them hear my words so that they learn to fear me. So how do we learn to fear him? Through the words. Well, we learn to trust the words. We learn to believe in the words. We test out and do and see the results of obedience or disobedience to the words. So we learn. Sometimes we learn the hard way. Sometimes we learn the easy way, but we learn. If you're receptive to seeing the lesson as it's playing out in front of you. Some of you are banging your head against the wall because it's happening and you just refuse to receive the lesson. And we know this is not shocking because what did we read when we're going through the readings in Deuteronomy? And if you do this, I will curse you. And if you don't listen, I'll curse you 7 times more. And if you're not instructed by me in these things, I'll curse you. He's saying this is learning, it's instruction. But if you don't do it, you don't get it, well then after all, I'm going to have to just keep doing it again and again and again and again and again. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense as we're going through this. The fear is the beginning. I mean, I almost should, every time people counsel with me and they're struggling with things, I said, you need to go back and work on your fear of Yahweh. You might want to pick up that teaching and listen to it, I don't know, once every month or so, just to remind you that's the core. That's the core of it all. If you haven't figured that out, nothing else is going to flow out of there. Without that, you're going to be very likely to do the things you shouldn't do or not do what you're supposed to do because you're not in that proper awe and reverence and fear. And to make it simple, for those who haven't heard the teaching, it's the fear of having him look down at you disappointed. In other words, you're afraid to have him hang his head low looking at you like, I can't believe you just did that. Why would you do that after all I've done for you? After all the instruction and guidance he gave you, why would you do that? That's the look you should be afraid of. Men, women, you've seen your spouse do this. You know you don't like that look. You know that look. I'm not saying that to be funny either. There's lots of things you can do in your marriage, and okay, they get mad or this, that, but oh no, that look is the thing you really don't want to see. Because that's not when you necessarily get yelling or screaming. You know you did something and they're really disappointed, and that's a different look. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Okay? Children know what that is too. When your parents look at you, instead of getting all mad, yelling and screaming and punishing, and they look at you like, I'm just totally disappointed in you. Do you want to disappoint the creator of the universe? Do you want to disappoint Mashiach? And that's the fear. Verse 11, and you came near and stood at the foot of the mountain, and the mountain burned with fire to the heart of the heavens, darkness, cloud, and thick darkness. And Yahweh spoke to you out of the midst of the fire. You heard a voice of words, but saw no form. You only heard a voice. Now this is very literal, but I'm going to take it for a second into something much more allegorical here, or it's hinting at in a remez form or either midrashic form. He spoke to you out of the midst of the fire. Remember the baptism of fire teaching. What's the baptism of fire? It's when he tests you with trials to see how well you did after you went through the water and filling of the Ruach. Right? You went through the water, you're washed clean. The Ruach then helps to fill you with the ability to gain knowledge and understanding and instruction so that you can then go and do what you got to do. And then the trial comes as a pop quiz. And during the pop quiz, you should hear him speak to you out of the fire. If you're listening, you'll hear him. I don't mean a real voice, but you'll hear him leading you to understand what you needed to glean out of the fire experience. He said, you heard a voice of words, but saw no form. You only heard a voice. And that also kind of happens in that fire experience. It's not like he's just going to show up and appear to you and say, okay, thank you for taking the pop quiz. Now let's go ahead and review. but you may allow that still small voice to speak to you. He made known to you his covenant. He made known to you his covenant, which he commanded you to do, the 10 words, and he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone. And Yahweh commanded me at that time to teach you laws and write rulings for you to do them in the land which you pass over to possess. Now, there are those that will say the covenant is limited to the 10 words. No. But those are the ones he spoke to them, and then he stopped talking to them and only talked to Moses. Be careful, we're not misunderstanding what's going on here. He spoke to you out of the fire. You heard his voice, saw no form, only heard the voice speaking just the 10 words. So some out there are trying to teach, well, the whole covenant is just the 10 words, the 10 commandments. No. The 10 commandments were the part they heard, all of them together. Context, context, context. Be careful with this. And Yahweh commanded me at that time to teach you laws and write rulings for you to do them in the land which you pass over to possess. So Yahweh then said, fine, I will work through Moses. And he said, he commanded me to teach you the laws. So here we had an opportunity to learn directly from the Almighty, and we said, no. See, this is kind of like Adam creating that quote-unquote fallen state. Well, Moses is creating the path for the rest of the journey, which is we don't get to learn directly from Yahweh. We rejected that. Now, that's going to get changed when Yeshua comes and sits on the throne. And then the law will go forth from Zion, the word of Yahweh from Jerusalem. But here, going forward, he's working through men, anointed, appointed, men granted. But through men, he told me, he says, Moses, he says, you go and teach them these laws, because that's what they said. They said, Moses, you teach us. Let Yahweh tell you and you teach us. That's in Exodus 20. He says, and Yahweh commanded me at that time to teach you the laws, the right rulings, and for you to do them in the land you pass over to possess. See, that's part of the covenant. Because remember, the covenant wasn't only do the 10 words. What was the covenant? You will do everything I say. Now, he didn't just say you'll do only the things you heard me say. He said, Moses, you go tell them everything I said. And there are verses where it says, and everything Yahweh said, Moses wrote them down. And so that's him speaking through his anointed, appointed conduit or teacher to the people. He says, therefore, diligently guard yourselves. Guard what? Yourself. See, before it's like guard the commands, guard the laws, guard this, guard the words. Now he's telling you, diligently guard yourself. Watch over yourself. Protect yourself from what? He says, diligently guard yourselves because you saw no form when Yahweh spoke to you in Horeb at the midst of the fire, lest you should do corruptly. So now you got to watch over yourself to make sure you don't do corruptly. So you need to be on red alert, high alert to know that there's a possibility that if you're not paying attention, you could do something corruptly. Otherwise, why would he say it? And now he gives a specific example here of idolatry. He says, unless you do corruptly and shall make yourselves a carved image in the form of any figure, the likeness of a male or a female, the likeness of any beast that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the heavens, the likeness of any creature that creeps on the ground, or the likeness of any fish that is in the water under the earth, and lift up your eyes to the heavens and shall see the sun and the moon and the stars, all the host of the heavens, and you shall be drawn away into bowing down to them and serving them, which Yahweh your Elohim has allotted to all the peoples under all the heavens. Now, this comes up every time we cover this in the Torah portions. I'll cover it real briefly here. This is talking about specifically the things that you would make that you would bow down to. Some of you are outdoorsmen, and so you like to have something like maybe something that represents some animals, like deer or other animals you might have a little figurine of, and just stuff that you like to have hanging on the wall or whatever, or your, fish or something, or maybe like my aunt, she collects penguins, and so she likes penguins. The thing is, she's never bound down to them as far as I know. So some of you are all worried about all these things you collect. Don't worry about things you collect. There's a thing called art, and there are things called idols. So if you own anything that anybody ever used as an idol, or you've ever used it as an idol, that's a problem. if you collect art that is nature, because nature is beautiful and spectacular, that is not idolatry just because you made an image. The Hebrew bears out that which is to be used in worship towards an Elohim. An idol was not just anything made as a sculpture or a piece of art. And so let's be careful with that, because I know some of you can get really afraid that somehow you're messing up because you happen to collect something, whatever it is you collect. Because you like those things, because there's a reason you like the animal or the art or whatever it is. It's something that just appeals to you. I like the imagery of a rhinoceros. I've read a book that used it as a metaphor for success, and so it talks about just charging ahead and not worrying about plowing through the trees and whatever you need to do. And so I have a picture of one on my wall. I found a nice one I liked on the computer, printed it out, stuck it on the wall. It kind of reminds me of a mindset and an attitude. I don't worship it. I don't pray to it. I didn't actually carve it into an image. It was actually a printed out picture. But you understand what I'm saying? Some of you, my daughter loves butterflies. And so she has all kinds of butterflies in her luggage, on her artwork, on her hanging in different places in her room. She likes butterflies. Don't think that's idolatry. Let's get a balance here. But if you happen to be someone who likes antiques and you go to an antique store and you see something, you might want to find out if it was ever used as an idol. That you don't need to have. Are we clear? Okay? Yahweh made the beauty for us to appreciate, and he created art as a way to appreciate it. And so let's find that balance. Okay, continuing. Where are we up to? 20. But Yahweh has taken you and brought you out of the iron furnace, out of Mitzrayim, to be his people, an inheritance as it is today. And Yahweh was enraged with me because of your words, and swore that I would not pass over the Jordan, and that I would not enter the good land which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you as an inheritance. Look, we've seen that there's been this whole emotional challenge for Moses. He did so many things. He worked so hard. He really wanted to go in the land, and Yahweh said, no, we're going to talk about this no more. This is a real hard thing for Moses. Could you imagine working as hard as he did to get to the end of a goal? And this is back to the color code stuff that we like to use, and as for the fun of personality stuff, this is a very red person. All the Reds care about is the result and the goal and the achievement. And he's right there, and he's like, he can touch it, he can almost taste it, it's right there, and Yahweh says, nope, you don't get to do it. So he's still struggling with this. Verse 22. For I am to die in this land, and I'm not passing over the Jordan, but you are passing over and shall possess the good land. Guard yourselves lest you forget the covenant of Yahweh. What was the covenant? You agreed to do everything he said. He said, guard yourself, lest you forget that. And by the way, that may also be a hint to the fact that Yahweh hadn't stopped talking yet. Yahweh may tell them more things. He sent prophets to tell them things. Like when he told them through Jeremiah, look, Babylon is coming. Submit yourself. Don't fight them. This is part of Yahweh's plan. When Rehoboam wanted to go after Jeroboam to bring back and restore the kingdom, and Yahweh said, no, this is of me. So he's telling them, guard yourself lest you forget the covenant of Yahweh. Whatever he says, whenever he says it. Because Yeshua said a few things, didn't he? Yeshua is the same Yahweh saying it here. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, this isn't a oneness doctrine. Go listen to the Father and the Son teaching. Do you know the Father and the Son? So he's saying, guard yourself lest you forget the covenant of Yahweh your Elohim, which he made with you. And you shall make for yourselves a carved image in the form of whatever Yahweh your Elohim has forbidden you. For Yahweh your Elohim is consuming fire, a zealous, ardent God, El, or whatever word you have in there, when you bring forth children and grandchildren, and shall grow old in the land, and shall do corruptly, and make a carved image in the form of whatever, and shall do what is evil in the eyes of Yahweh, your Elohim, to provoke him, I shall call the heavens and earth to witness against you on that day, that you soon completely perish from the land, which you pass over the Jordan to possess. You do not prolong your days in it, but are completely destroyed. He's not playing around. Does anybody think that Yahweh is playing games here? I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say he's deadly serious. He is dead serious. He's dead serious enough to have Yeshua come and die so that we could have life, knowing we were going to screw this whole thing up, that we were going to do corruptly and need him to die. And actually, we did corruptly way going back to Adam in the beginning. That's why he was slain even what? Before the foundation. I shall call the heavens and earth to witness against you. He says, and Yahweh shall scatter you, verse 27, you among all the peoples, and you shall be left few in number among the Gentiles where Yahweh drives you. How do you think it feels to be, you know what? Your fathers have died in the desert. They didn't go in the land like they were supposed to. You've been waiting all these years to finally get to go in. Here you are excited to go ahead and get it done, and he's already telling you you're going to mess it up. And you're like, come on, can't you have a little faith in me? Nope. I know you. And what does Yahweh say? He says, I know you. You've been stiff-necked since the day I knew you. He says, Yahweh's going to scatter you among the peoples. He says, and there you shall serve, verse 28, mighty ones, the works of men's hands, wood and stone, which neither see nor hear nor eat nor smell. But from there you shall seek Yahweh your Elohim and shall find him when you search for him with what? All your heart and all your being. And I don't think that just means you're searching so much as that you're ready to get committed to the covenant. Because the covenant requires all of that. All your heart, all your being. Are you ready to commit to the covenant? Because that's what you're going to do when you're from there. When he says, but from there, that means where? From being scattered among all the Gentile nations, from all the peoples of the earth that are not Israel corporate. You are to seek him with everything you have. Not looking for some truth, looking for all the truth. Not doing a little of it, doing all of it the best you can to the best of your ability with all your might, with all your strength. He says, in your distress, when all these words shall come upon you in the latter days, then you shall return to Yahweh your Elohim and shall obey his voice. There's proof that the renewed covenant is the same covenant. It's just being renewed. Now, when you say renewed, that confuses people. It will be absolutely a brand new covenant with the same exact terms. Because after all, you break a contract, you have to write a new one. So the contract was broken. So now we have to write a new one. That doesn't mean it doesn't have to be any different. It could be exactly the same as the old one. Here's the wording. Let's make sure we didn't miss this. He says, in your distress, what? When you're seeking Yahweh from the place that he scattered you among the Gentiles, in your distress, when all these words come upon you that I've already said are going to happen, which, by the way, is part of the proof that Yahweh is who he is, because what he says comes to be. He says, in your distress, when that's all happening in the latter days. It's not saying when it just happens, because it's going to happen a lot earlier than now. I mean, they started getting scattered way, way, way before, even before Yeshua, the scattering began. A good long time before Yeshua. And so here we have him saying, in your distress, in the latter days, then you shall return to Yahweh. Not just the seeking and asking, that stuff we do. He says, now you're going to return to Yahweh and shall obey his voice. That's the covenant. Why doesn't Christianity teach this? I mean, after all, they're claiming latter days, and they're claiming that they're in the end times, and they're claiming all these things. And in those latter days, you're going to obey the voice as originally covenanted. What were the terms? You agree to obey everything I say, to obey my voice. There it is. So in the latter days, what is Jeremiah 31 talking about? The same thing as Exodus 19. Same type of covenant, no different. Only difference is what? This time we won't break it. He says you're not going to do the same thing this time. This time you're going to keep it because you'll have gone out there and seen what it's like when you don't. And you will have made teshuvah. You will have done repentance. You'll have turned around. It says, and you will come back and return to Yahweh. That's what teshuvah looks like. He says, for Yahweh your Elohim is a compassionate El. He does not forsake you, nor destroy you, nor forget the covenant of your fathers, which he swore to them. Now that's a different covenant. That's the covenant of, I have promised you that I will do these things to you and to your children for generations to come. He said to Abraham, you will be the father of many nations. So those are promises in that covenant thing. Remember, we've said there's lots of different covenants. What you're worried about and need to deal with is something called the covenant. The covenant that started at Sinai with, you agree to do what he says. Not complicated. All right? So Yahweh's not going to forget his covenant in verse 31, which is interesting because it turned out to be a 31, just like Jeremiah 31 and verse 31, and all these covenantal verses with a 31 in it. That's kind of interesting. It could be just random. New from the Bible code. Rabbi Steve says there's a 31 significance here. Or just coincidence. Film at 11. Okay, so they don't ever do that anymore. Everybody's watching 24-hour take cable now. There's no big thing to wait till 11 o'clock to see or anything, right? Okay, verse 32. How far am I going with this anyway? 40, okay. For ask now of the days that are past, which were before you since the day that Elohim created man on the earth, and ask from one end of the heavens to the other end of the heavens, whether there has been a word as great as this, or has been heard like this. Now, he's already said this, but I was even telling them, look, go check it out. Has anybody ever had a story like this, where they could say, this is our experience with our Elohim? Oh, they got a lot of big monuments and statues and all kinds of carvings, but did they ever do this? Did you ever hear the voice? Did you ever see the signs and wonders on this kind of scale? We're talking about the pillar of fire, the pillar of cloud, and all the other things that you experienced. Parting of the sea? No. You went up to a piece of stone, you asked for a bunch of stuff, you gave an offering of some sort, and then went on with your life. And then if something went well, you gave credit to the piece of stone, and if it didn't, you just figured it was you. There was nothing like this. So he's encouraging them, go check it out. See if you can compare it. Is there anything like this? Nothing's like this. Has a people heard the voice of Elohim speaking out of the midst of the fire as you have heard and live? Or has Elohim tried to go and take for himself a nation from the midst of a nation? Is there any story like that goes along with a nation being pulled out of a nation by an Elohim? Oh, you got all kinds of nations trying to get out from under each other politically, secular, cultural stuff. But this is Elohim pulling a nation out from within a nation. By trials, by signs, by wonders, by battle, by a strong hand and outstretched arm, and by great fearsome deeds, according to all that Yahweh your Elohim did for you in Mitzrayim before your eyes. He's saying, don't forget, you watched all this. You witnessed all of this. And if you didn't, your parents did, because they were all there. This is only 40 years later. There are people that remember the stories being passed down. There were also people that were there that were under 20. And so now they're still there. They remember. Remember, it was only the men 20 and over, and all that generation that didn't get to go. He says, you have been shown it to know that Yahweh himself is Elohim. There is no one beside him. From the heavens he let you hear his voice to instruct you, and on the earth he showed you his great fire, and you heard his words out of the midst of the fire. And because he loved your fathers, therefore he chose their seed after them and brought you out of Mitzrayim with his presence and his great power, to drive out from before you nations greater and stronger than you, to bring you in to give you their land as an inheritance as it is today. And you shall know today and shall recall to your heart that Yahweh himself is Elohim in the heavens above, and on the earth beneath there is none else. And you can clap for that. And you shall guard his laws and his commands, which I command you today, so that it is well with you and with your children after you, so that you prolong your days on the soil which Yahweh, your Elohim, is giving you for all time. So he closes it there, verse 40. I know there's more to the chapter, but this is where the point ends. He closes it with, and you shall guard. How many times in 4 chapters has he told them to guard the commands, guard the laws, guard the right ruling, guard yourself? I mean, almost every 3 or 4 verses, if not more, it's there. But how many of you really guard this stuff? Some of you barely remember it or aware of it and sneaks up on you. Any of you don't raise your hand now. You don't have to embarrass yourself. Anybody have Shabbat sneak up on them on a weekly basis? Anybody have more often the feast all of a sudden show up? It's like, where did that come from? I get phone calls, and don't think I remember which one of you it was because I don't. But I get phone calls from some of you a week or two before trumpets going, when's trumpets? When's Sukkot? And the when's trumpet question, I guess, is okay for people that don't know what the calendar is, etc. But they ask when Sukkot is. The Sukkot date's been on the website since we finished Passover. Actually, no, for all of last year before we even got to Passover. I put all the dates for the whole year on there in advance. Been there the whole time. But it's like sneaking up on them. Or they'll say to me, well, I'm not sure I can go, because I didn't get time to really tell my bosses. Wait, but you've been with us for 2 years. How did you not know to tell your bosses you needed the time off? Well, I forgot. You're not guarding. Are you guarding the commands? This is not a joke. This is not a game. This is actually literally life and death. And now you have to turn there, but in Deuteronomy 30, what does Moses say to you? I lay before you life and death. Okay, let's see, verse 19 of chapter 30. I've called the heavens and earth as witnesses today against you. Kind of the same thing here in one of the verses in chapter 4, the witnesses of heaven and earth. He said, I've set before you life and death, blessing and the curse, therefore choose life so that you live. He's pleading with them. He says, you need to love Yahweh, your Elohim, obey his voice, and cling to him because he is your life and the length of your days. But do you believe that? You say amen, and you get all excited and you clap. But what happens when things get to that push comes to shove place? That's when we find out what you really are kind of made out of. That's why he lets you go into trials. You wonder, when you go into trial, I wonder why he's picking on me, or what did I do wrong? No, he's just trying to see what you're made of. He's just giving you a pop quiz. It's not like, when you stub your toe, you think, I must have done something wrong, so I stubbed my toe. That's not a trial. That's just an accident. Probably because you woke up at a time nobody should wake up. Any time before noon, that is, in case you were wondering. And you were too tired and you stubbed your toe. It had nothing to do with, I must have done something wrong. Well, yes, you tried to wake up before noon. That was foolish, and that was happens. Okay. I'll instruct you guys. You want to get discipled? We work from 12 to 4. That's what we disciple. That's 12 noon to 4 a.m. in case you were confused. It's not a 4-hour thing. Okay? We disciple from 12 to 4. Okay. It's a 16-hour deal. Where are we in time? We got time for the next one. Okay, so just to reiterate, in this chapter, we talked about how he made known to you his covenant. That was at the beginning of the chapter. He tells you not to forget the covenant. And he also tells you, in case you were wondering, he's not going to forget. Even if you forget, he's not going to forget. That's the 3 big takeaways out of this chapter here. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 8. I wonder what we're going to find there. We've already talked about this. We can begin in verse 1. Guard to do every command which I command you today. He didn't mean just the 10 words, do you think, right there? When he said every command, he's just talking about the 10 commandments, right? No? But see, this is kind of the stuff that's out there. That whole Melchizedekian thing out there is trying to say, oh, no, only the things before the golden calf, or only the things, no. Can we know and admit and absolutely know that in Deuteronomy, all that stuff already happened? Did it not? They're already through all of that wilderness, all of that mess, and they're at the Jordan. So when he says, guard to do every command which I command you, that includes all of the Torah. You see, some of you guys are saying, well, when are you going to do that Melchizedekian thing? Why do I need to do any more than what I just did? Stop being so naive and foolish to listen to these people trying to give you a justification, not this whole sanctification, to justify your doing less. You're buying into it because you don't want to guard and keep all the commands. You're failing the test that we're about to get to in verse 2. You're demonstrating that it is not in your heart to keep his commandments. I promise you one thing, absolutely guaranteed. I'll stand here and as the sun, moon, Yah, whatever is my witness. Remember we talked about vows, be careful with that. As Yah is my witness, you will not get in trouble for doing more. But you could absolutely get in a lot of trouble for not doing it all. Be careful with buying into anybody telling you you don't have to do stuff. Oh, well, because of here in Hebrews and this confusion about what was being talked about, and over here in Galatians, because after all, whatever, that undermines everything that Moses taught us in Deuteronomy. Why do I need to spend 5, 6, 10 parts explaining somebody else's teaching on foolishness? Because there's a part of you that wants to believe them so you don't have to do everything. Let's be honest. So why are you all still waiting for that teaching? I've said this in many teachings. You don't need that teaching. Now, I may still do it because there needs to be something out there to be up against, like shining light, like we talked about earlier in the service, shining light on a problem. But here it is right here. This is in Deuteronomy at the Jordan, crossing over into the land. Moses saying, guard to do everything. He didn't say do everything except when Yeshua comes, the stuff that came after the golden calf. Now, he did have forethought to tell you, you're going to get scattered when you mess this thing up, and you're going to go do this, and then you're going to come back. But apparently he had no forethought to tell us that, hey, when the golden calf thing happened, those are laws that were against you, and later on you won't have to do them. Well, that's not in there anywhere. And by the way, that's not in Hebrews or Galatians either. But for the mind that is susceptible to the negative influences of the people, or the mind that is not ready to obey every word that comes forth out of the mouth of Yah, they're confused. They're looking for the less, not the more. The minimum, not the maximum. I'll say it again. If you do more and it turns out you didn't need to, I promise you, you're not getting punished. Because you still passed the test. It was still in your heart to keep his commands, wasn't it? But if you do less, don't tell me, well, because I did the research. No, you did less because you wanted to do less. You were glad to receive it, and you were glad to find out you didn't have to do it. So so you grabbed onto it, like a fish to water, or whatever idiom you want. I mean, you just jumped on it. And there are people out there that you know personally that did that. Because they are not ready to do all. They were hoping to do less. Verse 2. And you shall remember that Yahweh your Elohim led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness to humble you. That's the biggest problem right there. A person who's been humbled is not going to be thinking for a second to do less. They're going to say, I want to be careful. I want to be safe. I'm going to guard. I'm going to do everything I can. And if it turns out I didn't have to, hey, it's okay. I'm still going to get the words, well done, good and trustworthy servant. But if you start latching onto excuses to do less, where is that going to leave you if it turns out you're wrong? He says that he led you through the wilderness to humble you. So I have often taught, it doesn't say it here, but I think this is a metaphor, a shadow picture, a type of our lives today. Don't we have, in a sense, aren't we walking through a wilderness journey of sorts? And in that journey, what do we need more than anything else? To be humbled. And in the humbling, he's then going to test us. He said he humbled you to prove, to know what is in your heart, whether you are going to guard his commands or not. He wants to know whether it's in your heart to do it, not if you do it. In other words, if it's in your heart, you're going to make the effort, and sometimes you may fall short, but you want to do it. You're going to try to do it. You're going to be disappointed in yourself when you fall short and brush yourself off, get up right away and fix it and go forward. He wants to see the heart behind it. He's not expecting you to be perfect. He wants you to want to be perfect. I don't know how many times I've had to say that, and still people don't get that. Because some people out there get very depressed because they feel like they're never going to get there. You don't have to get there. You have to just want to and make every possible, with all your heart, with all your being, make the effort to do it. And you will make, look, can everybody agree that Paul made the effort? Anybody have any problem with knowing that Paul did as hard as and good as he could? And he still said that he had a problem in his members where that which he wanted to do, he didn't do, and that which he didn't want to do, he did. There was a conflict there. And he also talks about a thorn in his side, whether that was spiritual or physical, we don't know. But it's an examination of the heart. There's no surprise that we did 64 parts of that teaching because the heart is the matter. Of course, some of you out there keep referring to the teaching as the matters of the heart. No, that's a Hallmark series. Okay, that's not my teaching series. Okay, it doesn't take place in Alaska or Canada or anyplace else. It's about the heart, okay? The heart is the matter. The heart is the problem. It's the issue. So Deuteronomy 8:2, look at how it's worded. You're going through this journey for what purpose? So that you can get humbled, and then he can watch and see and test and prove where your heart's at. So all you need to do is, as a matter of fact, he's more interested when you mess up than when you don't mess up to see what you do next. Because after all, doing the right thing sometimes is very easy to do. Sometimes you would have done those things even before you knew about Torah. I'm sure that most of you would never have, you wouldn't have stolen anything. You wouldn't have committed murder. You wouldn't have committed adultery. A lot of the Torah you probably wouldn't have done even if you didn't know it was Torah. What he wants to see, though, is when you do mess up, what do you do next? Do you feel bad about it? Do you repent about it? Do you own it? Do you go to him and say, Abba, I messed up? Sometimes you got to go to the person you messed up with and own it and say, I messed up. And so do you repent? Do you do the whole repentance process? We got the teaching on that that's out there. And then make teshuvah, get back on the path. I think he's much more excited about that moment than about the moments when you're just doing everything right. Kind of like the verse that says, what, just because you did everything right, do you think you're such a big deal servant? He says, no, if you did exactly what you were told, he calls you a useless servant. Because you didn't go above and beyond. And plus he wants to see, what do you do when you mess up? Not that I'm encouraging you to mess up and then show him what you do. Don't misunderstand. He knows we struggle. But in the forever kingdom, sort of scenario, that's for Curtis. Okay, scenario, in the forever kingdom situation, he wants to know in that time frame of forever that he knows your heart and there will be no rebellion. There will be no problems or issues because your desire is to be perfect. And he needs to see it. He needs to watch. Oh, but Yahweh knows everything. Yes, and for whatever reason, he's chosen to need to see it. And so we need to show him. That's why I call this the Deuteronomy 8:2 test. I don't think anybody's ever said that other than me. I don't think anybody still says it other than me, and it's irrelevant. But that's the way I see it. This whole life is that test. The reason you were born was to see if you can pass that test. But you can't even take the test until he opens your eyes, opens your ears, and opens your heart. So don't think for a second all your friends and family are being tested according to Deuteronomy 8:2 because they're not handed an exam and a pencil to fill it out until their eyes are open and ears are open, etc. Hopefully you all understand that. But once they are, you are now subject to that test. And if you listen to Millennium Kingdom teaching, you know that I believe everybody gets that one time to take the exam. And this may not be their time. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and listen to that teaching. Okay? Okay. All of that, and we only got into verse 2. And I'm planning to go all the way to 20. I don't know how far we're going to get here. Verse 3. So he did humble you. He said he led you through the wilderness to humble you, and he did. He humbled you and let you suffer hunger and fed you with manna which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, to make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of Yahweh. So there's a humbling, and there's a connection to hunger. Isn't that interesting? Didn't we just go through something where we got real hungry? What was that called? Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonements. And so what was that also? When it talks about afflicting yourself, there's a humbling there to recognize that you need, that you desire and you need. But also there's a connection to the Beatitudes. Children learned that all week. My wife is in here after doing all the children's programs, so give her put a little smile on her face to mention something from the Beatitudes. And so we have in verse 6, blessed are those who hunger for what? They're hungry and thirsty for righteousness. What do we see here in verse 3? He humbled them back in Deuteronomy 8 and let them suffer and fed them with manna, which they did not know, nor did their fathers know, to make them know what? That you don't live just by food and physical things, but you must live by every word that comes out of the mouth of Yahweh. And so if you are to live by those words, to me that makes total sense why that's the covenant. The covenant is, if you would just obey the words that are the bread of life, the words that you need that are going to sustain you, then why wouldn't you want to make that covenant? Because after all, you should already know that you live by every word that comes out of the mouth of Yahweh, not just by bread alone. Oh, you need physical bread because you're a physical being. You need food. But that's not going to give you life without living by every word. It may give you physical life up to a point, but this isn't the real, this is a type and shadow of what's coming. We are literally shadow pictures. We are types and shadows of what we're looking forward to. This is nothing in terms of life compared to what's coming. And for that life, you need to have learned how to live by every word that comes out of his mouth. And that's only going to work if you can trust it and believe it, have full emunah about it. Amen. Continuing here in verse 4. Your garments did not wear out on you, nor did your foot swell these 40 years. Thus you shall know that in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, so Yahweh your Elohim disciplines you. So he said, look, I put you through this test. I gave you the food. Your clothes didn't wear out, etc. But you saw through all the whole process, even though I gave you all that stuff, there was discipline. I wasn't just spoiling you. He didn't bring them out of Egypt and just plop them right down in the land with no conflict, no issues, and nothing but wonderful stuff all around them. They were not ready for that. They would have ruined it. Actually, they did. Because they still weren't ready. They had not, as a nation and individually as well, figured out how to live by every word that comes out of the mouth of Yahweh. They hadn't learned the fear of Yahweh. They hadn't learned to guard the commands, to guard themselves. They hadn't learned any of that stuff. So what did they do? They wrecked the place. And so what did he do? He says, you're not wrecking my place. Get out. Tell you what, I'll make it easier for you. I'll have somebody come and get you. And it's not a taxi service. It wasn't Uber. It was Babylon. And it was Assyria that came and took them out. He says, thus you shall know that in your heart. So not only so this is relational, it's not informational. You know in your head, that's informational. You're going to know in your heart. You're going to have a relationship with this. You're going to have an understanding that's much deeper, that as a man disciplines his son, so Yahweh Elohim, your Elohim, disciplines you. And therefore you shall guard the commands. He said it again. He said it in verse 1, and now he said it again in verse 6 here. Wow. He asks again in verse 2, actually. He mentions guard the man almost every verse. Therefore you shall guard the commands of Yahweh your Elohim, to walk in his ways and to fear him. For Yahweh your Elohim is bringing you into a good land, a land of streams, of water. See, now he's going to give them the carrot. He's been giving them a little bit of the stick, saying, this is what you need to be afraid of. He said, because it's worth it. That's more or less what he's saying, isn't it? He says he's going to discipline you, and he's going to test you, and he's going to humble you, and he's going to do all these things. Why? Because you need to be trained, matured, and your character right to live in this paradise of a place. He's sending you into a good land full of streams of water and fountains and springs that flow out of the valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a land in which you eat bread without scarcity, in which you do not lack at all, a land whose stones are iron and out of whose hills you dig copper. And you shall eat and be satisfied and shall bless Yahweh your Elohim for the good land which he has given you. That whole thing says, and we do this after the meals and stuff, that you recognize that you put you through the rough times to get you to the good times so you can recognize that that was the point of it all along. That you eat and are satisfied and realize that Yahweh has blessed you with these things because you went through the process and came out of the other side, changed into his image. That's essentially what it's saying. Verse 11, be on guard lest you forget Yahweh your Elohim by not guarding his commands and his right rulings and his laws which I command you today, lest you get complacent, basically, lest you eat and are satisfied and build lovely houses and dwell in them, and in your herds and your flocks increase, and your silver and gold are increased, and you shall have, and all you have shall be increased, that your heart then becomes lifted up, and you forget Yahweh your Elohim is the one who gave you all this stuff. He's the one who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim from the house of bondage, who led you through the great awesome wilderness, fiery serpents and scorpions and thirst, where there was no water, who brought you water out of the flinty rock, who fed you in the wilderness with manna, which your fathers did not know, in order to humble you and try you, to do you good in the end. It's all to humble you and test you, Deuteronomy 8:2, so that ultimately he can do you good in the end. And then you shall say in your heart, my power and my strength and my hand have made all this wealth for me. Because remember, he's talking about here that people would forget, oh, I'm so successful and everything's so wonderful. And we've seen this happen. Some of you are wondering, why is my life such a struggle? Because that's the best place for you to be. Needing him for everything is much better than having everything. I know that sounds kind of warped in our fleshly sense, our worldly mind. That doesn't mean you cannot get yourself to the place through your efforts to at least be above water better than you are. But he may just want you to be comfortably just a little bit above water, in a much better place than just being out on the beach, having a great time and thinking you don't need him anymore. He says, and you shall say in your heart, my power, my strength, my hand have made me all this wealth. Oh, but you shall remember Yahweh your Elohim, for it is he who gave you that power, the power to get wealth in order to establish his covenant. That's why we went through all this. The whole point of the wealth was to help him establish the covenant, which he swore to your fathers as it is today. So here in verse 18, that's the really important connection. What does wealth have to do with establishing his covenant? Two things. One is it shows you and demonstrates to you there is blessing in all of this. The other is that with your wealth, we can reach other people. Because in a world did you think that Yahweh knew we live in a world where you can't do anything for free? You're not going to reach anybody without any money. You're not going to reach anybody without the internet or without CDs or without whatever. All this stuff costs something. So why do we need the wealth? To be effective. We're conduits. We're flow-throughs. The wealth isn't just there so that you can enjoy things, although it is there to some degree to do that so that you can say, look at what believing and following and obeying Yahweh brings. And then use it to help share that message. But be careful lest you think, oh, no, my strength, my power, I didn't need him for this. Be very careful with that. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Let's go ahead and pray. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. Father, we just want to come before you now and make sure that when we have eaten, we are satisfied and we are blessed with abundance, that we do not forget. That, Father, we understand that you have made known to us our covenant, and that we are not to forget. We're to guard after the commands and the right rulings and all that you do. We're to do it with all of our heart and all of our being. We're to fear you in all things. And we understand that you don't forget the things that you've done. You don't forget the commitments that you've made. And you expect us likewise to do the same. Father, we just want to thank you now for the relationship, opening our eyes, opening our ears and our hearts so that we can truly know you, the true living Elohim. That, Father, that we could have what we have through the Messiah, through your Son, Yeshua, through our Messiah, that relationship, that discipleship, that example, so that we truly can be changed from what we are into what he is and what you are. So, Father, we want to thank you for all, asking that you continue the work that you started in us, knowing that we trust that you will finish and complete, provided we make every effort to demonstrate the Deuteronomy 8:2 test, that it's in our heart. And as long as we can show that it's in our heart, we trust and know that you will complete the work that we've started, or that we should say that you started in us. So, Father, we thank you. We praise you, giving you all glory and all honor, in the name above all names, Yeshua our Messiah. Amen. Amen.